Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Producing Music with APS. I'll be your host tonight, as usual, and my guest today is Robert George. Robert has been producing and engineering new and seasoned artists from all around the US for over 30 years. He has worked in almost every musical genre and has also taught audio engineering and UNCA, and thus private audio tutoring as well. Robert's skills as a producer, engineer, drummer, and songwriter have led to the success of Sound Temple Studios over the past 10 years. Many clients record album after album with Robert because he's easy to work with and brings a positive energy to every project. His work style is best described in his own words. It's my passion to bring forth the true creative expression from an artist or a group. I try to shape the music into a form that is accessible while totally honoring the intent of the musician. And above all, of course, Robert is a user of APS. Please welcome Robert George.
Hey, Chris.
Hi, Robert.
Thank you for that nice introduction.
Good to see you, and thank you for accepting to be here.
I'm really grateful to be here. I love the company, love the product, and been looking forward to this.
Well, I've been obviously preparing myself a little bit before that interview. And the more I read and the more I listened, the more I felt we have a lot in common.
We do.
And well, one of the things that kind of spiked my interest is the way you've started constructing that place that we're seeing you in. And I've read that the team that designed the studio used Fibonacci scales and golden ratio. Would
Yes.
you would you just say a little bit about that? Because while golden ratio is often talked about, the Fibonacci is less so in terms of acoustics. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, and actually, all I can really tell you is a little bit. I know just enough to get myself in trouble. But I do know that in nature, there is math in nature, and there is perfect math regarding acoustics. And seashells, for example, I think use Fibonacci's scale in the way that they manifest in nature and other things. And there's certain natural acoustics that occur in nature that enhance music when it's recorded. And the designer that put this phone over here because I'm getting a little echo. The designer that built my studio, he's very big on this type of math. And I was new to it when I met him 12 years ago. But I've become more familiar with these type of acoustics over the years and just heard the benefits for the past 10 years. And when you're recording acoustic instruments in this studio, you don't have to do a lot of EQing on the back end because the acoustics really capture the instrument in a very natural way. So there's not a lot of corrective EQ that's necessary. And that makes a big difference if you're doing a lot of recording a lot of acoustic music like I am. So I've been really pleased. And his name is Wesley Show. We should give him credit. And he lives several hours from here in Chapel Hill. And he and his team, Tony Brett and Tom, they did a fabulous job on the studio. I've been really, really enjoying it for the past 10 years, and my clients love it. So.
Well, I'm kind of guessing because you've told me as well that you're going to show the studio as well with
Yeah.
your iPhone. So we'll maybe. Do you
Now,
want to start with that?
yeah, I'll grab
Show
my
us a bit
phone
on the place. Okay,
and
let's try to see how that works. We're in your mixing room right now.
yeah. First, I will show you a little bit of the gear. We've got a lot of
Okay,
great outboard gear.
so that's your back. Okay, that's your
Yeah,
hardware
that's to
behind
my
you,
back,
right?
and you can see the control room. It's a pretty large control room.
Yeah.
A lot of bass trapping, very, very well balanced for mixing. There's the back wall is like 21 inches deep. That's a big bass trap, and small SSL console, and of course the APS monitors and some in the wall monitors as well. And right now I'm just walking through one of the sound locks, which also doubles as a alternative booth. It doesn't get used very often because, as you can see, I have three
Wow.
good size ISO booths. And then the medium, I would say, can't really call it large, but certainly big enough. Live room. Mostly drums get recorded here, but lots of other things. Have a 7-foot grand Yamaha piano. That's one of the biggest draws. And I'll show you, this is the main booth as you walk in. And as you can see, everywhere you are in the studio, everybody can see everybody.
Great.
No matter where you are,
important.
the artists can see each other, and the engineer can see the artists, and vice versa. And this middle booth is unique in that the piano can roll right in here. And this is probably the most neutral of all the booths. And it has diffusion as well as absorption. And when you record piano or drums in this room, the room really disappears the way it was designed. It's quite amazing. You don't hear the room, you just hear the instrument, which is hard to come by with recording booths. Most recording booths are actually quite difficult to deal with. And this is probably the tightest of all the three rooms, and it has the most absorption in it. And I record vocals a lot in here. Yeah, so maybe we'll just head back into the control room and we could talk some more.
Great. So while Robert gets back, it's really interesting to see how a big studio still manages to continue its work despite the realities of the modern producing market, so to speak. And could you tell us, because you were a drummer and you were a musician, so how did you get from being a musician to being a producer as well, and to being a studio owner, and how has that impacted your look at music while you were playing or maybe recording?
Well, it's interesting because I went from playing drums to getting interested in songwriting, and then songwriting, I got interested in production. And then I did, when I was in college, I did some volunteer work to run a PA at we'll call it a spiritual organization. And then I got the sort of the tech bug. And from there, I took some classes while I was at music school in the University of Miami. I took some audio engineering classes. Even though I wasn't a major, I sort of snuck my way into the program and found that it came pretty easy for me. And I really enjoyed it. So then I continued pursuing songwriting. And that really led into more of a passion for production, but it took a while to make that transition. And then I realized that playing and songwriting and all those things really dovetail quite nicely into producing. So that's so engineering and producing really are they go hand in hand, and one flows into the other for me. It's they often are not separate, but sometimes they are, because sometimes you have a client where he really is not looking for you to produce, he's just looking for you to engineer. So
yeah, exactly, depending on what's needed.
Yes, exactly.
So you mentioned that the rooms you have in your studio are pretty neutral, so you don't need to do a lot of corrective EQ. And my question would be, how much do you EQ on the way in, and what do you record on? Is it a DAW? Do you have a tape
Yeah.
deck still, or?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of EQ on the way in, except for drums. I like to get the drums sounding, closer to a finished sound. Because you're close miking drums as well as miking the room and overheads. Close mic on toms and snares. You often need to do some subtractive EQ on the way in to
Mhm.
really get them to sound more finished. So most, I mean, I have a whole set of EQs in the rack, but mostly I use them for EQing drums on the way in. And I have several DAWs. I'm mainly a Nuendo user,
Mhm.
Nuendo and Cubase, but I also use Pro Tools when
Mhm.
I need to, mostly for film work.
Mhm.
I do quite a bit of ADR work. We're only about 2.5 hours from Atlanta, and Atlanta is like the new Hollywood. The majority of the TV shows and movies now
Mhm.
are produced down there, and there's a lot of actors that live locally in Asheville and work there and other
Okay.
places, and they often have to re-record their dialogue.
Yeah.
So that's been actually a pretty big part of my income over the past 6 or 7 years, and has gotten bigger since Atlanta has gotten bigger.
It's kind of interesting because myself as a composer and producer feel that film has also become a really good place for the musicians and composers and the songwriters to actually look into, because it's
Yes.
very often overlooked. At least in Europe, we try to strive for the radio, which is not often something everybody will get on. While the film has been produced in such incredible amounts that we need the music for it. So
Yeah.
it's something I think we should all start looking at more closely.
I agree. It's probably the only real growth area in the audio industry. I mean, maybe video games,
Yeah,
and maybe I'm missing one, but it certainly is one of the primary areas in the audio
yeah,
industry that is growing.
yeah, yeah. I feel that too. Um, uh, my question would be now perhaps to look at how you judge what you record, and obviously we use speakers for that. Or headphones. And being a APS talk, I can't overlook those two classic 2020s that you have.
Yes, I'm going to pull back so you can see them both.
They look gorgeous, obviously, on that shelf. Could you tell us a little bit, because I know you've been using the original classics, and actually quite a lot of people have been asking how what the difference would be, and I would actually be interested to know what you feel about the difference between the two models, and how you find them in daily work.
Yeah. So, well, I'll tell you how I first found out about APS. Believe it or not, I was actually interested in, I hadn't decided to purchase, but I was interested in buying monitors made from another manufacturer. And I found a used pair. I don't know if it's on eBay or something. And I emailed the guy and asked him why he was selling them. And he said, "Well, I got these Polish monitors and they translate a little better."
Okay.
So of course, I immediately found out that they were the original classics, and thought, well, I should probably be interested in, or get interested in those and find out more. And at the time there were only a couple of reviews. They were pretty
Mm,
new, but there was one review that I read in particular, and this guy seemed quite knowledgeable, and it was just glowing. Especially the value for the quality that you were
mhm,
getting.
mhm,
And so I reached out and got a pair, and I had tried several others from some of the
mhm,
bigger companies, and I loved them, and used them for several years, and found that the number of remixes that I was doing, getting notes back from clients, were going down.
that's
Um,
good.
yeah, and so when I heard that these were a new and improved version, I I ordered them right away without much thought. I mean, I think I asked what are the differences, and you could talk more about that. But for me, they're just flatter. I think they're slightly more trustworthy. I think things translate even better. The old ones weren't fatiguing, but these are probably less fatiguing.
Okay.
I think, but like I said, the other ones were not fatiguing. But I can mix for long periods of time on these and feel like I mean, you should take breaks anyway, regular breaks, but I feel like it's not as critical for me to take a lot of breaks when I'm mixing on these. I do use a Neumann Sub with these.
Mhm.
And I like it because it has a foot switch where I can just bypass the
All right.
yeah, it bypasses the sub and then just puts the APSs back full range. So
Okay.
with an instant press on my foot, I can hear the APS just by themselves full range, or pop the sub back
So
in with the roll off.
okay. So the roll-off happens on the sub.
Roll off happens on the sub.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because the signal goes into the sub first, then to
Mhm.
the APS. So
So, the eternal question that I also get asked a lot is how much time do you spend on the small speakers versus the big massive ones in the wall?
well, honestly, I spent a lot of money on those bigs. And then there's all the power amps and the expensive crossovers behind over there. And honestly, these days, my mixes seem to translate so well, and I get so few remixes by just focusing on the APS, bypassing the sub, and putting it on the cheap
Yeah.
speakers also.
Mhm.
That I rarely go to my bigs. They just are not as flat. They're not as
Mhm.
trustworthy. So I'll throw my headphones on as another reference as well. So right now I'm going with what's working. I used to use my bigs a lot more, and I was getting more revisions. So I'm trying to learn from what's working
Mm.
and go more with that. And so that's the current plan.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
My experience in the 90s when I was working a lot in the French studios after my SAE studies was that the big ones were for the producers at the back of the, on the couch, so that whenever we finished mixing, we would throw those on just, to have a lot of SPL in the room. So,
Yeah, they're impressive, but I'll stop there.
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But speaking of translation mixes, etc., how do you feel about what we're living through? Because basically, the question I'm asking myself is that we have a very large um, span between, on one hand, the mono, kind of quasi mono Bluetooth speakers, which a lot of people use, through iPhones and Android telephones just sitting on your desk and playing the music, to car stereos, and recently the Atmos based Apple Music on headphones, which is the binaural way of looking at things. And it's actually getting very complex with the actual middle level kind of a living room, the system out of the way, because most people don't even have one anymore.
Yeah, it's you have to really take into account when you're mixing how it's going to sound on somebody's tiny little iPhone
Yeah.
speakers, and what it's going to sound like on their laptop speakers, but more often the speakers on their phone or their iPad.
Mm.
And I was talking to one of my clients the other day, very, very talented composer, pianist, and I said, I'd send her some mixes, and I said, "What did you listen to the mixes on?" And thinking she had a high-end stereo or at least really good headphones, and she said just the speakers on my laptop, and
Yeah.
and that's more and more
It's
common.
life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you have to listen and through those devices to really
Yeah.
know. These days, if you put the harmonic saturation in the right place when you're
Mhm.
mixing, it makes things translate a lot better. So you
Yeah.
really need to focus on that. So you're boosting frequencies and trying to create harmonics in certain frequencies without hopefully hurting it on the regular speakers,
Mhm.
so that it'll translate well on those. I'm waiting for somebody to come out with a box that you can just select iPhone, iPad, laptop, and that would just sit somewhere here, and so I can just flip, really quickly.
Well, I know there's a plugin, but
Yeah, there's a
I've
plugin.
tested a couple of years ago and it didn't sound really good, so I stopped using it. What I use is a Bluetooth connection to iPhone that sends my mix from the door to the iPhone. So that's as close as I got to having it in real time. But I
Yeah,
agree, it would be nice to have a kind of an emulation that goes through all of them.
yeah, with 3 buttons. So
Yeah.
I'm pitching that as a product for APS. That would
Okay.
not be something I would expect, but it
Sounds
would
like a
be
good
great.
idea. We'll look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of the speakers, APS and classics, I'd like to remind you that today is the very last day where you can vote for the classic on the SOS Editors Pick Gear of the Year 2020. So, I mean 2021. Sorry. Uh, so we've been nominated, but it's obviously up to all of us, you guys, voting and girls, obviously, to get us in there, up there on the first place, if possible. So this is the very last day, the very last few hours. So if you want to help us out, please do so. We'll be eternally grateful. Thank
Yes,
you
and
very much.
I think it would be well deserved. Uh,
Yes,
should we talk
thanks.
about positioning of
Yeah,
these, or come back
let's,
to that?
because it's pretty original. I haven't seen many of those turned 90 degrees horizontally. So tell us
Yeah.
why you did that.
Well, so the first reason that I even wanted to try it, because it was not recommended by you. I did ask that question. I asked Ray and you, and you said, "Well, they'll sound fine, but we we would suggest that you put them vertically." So the main reason, as you can see, I've got the bigs there, and even though I don't use them a lot,
Yeah,
if I put these up
we'll cover
vertically,
them.
they're
Yeah.
really going to cause some problems. I'm going to get some reflection off the back, so the bigs won't sound right.
Yeah.
So initially, I thought, well, let me just get them tucked under the bigs and see how they sound. And I'd listen to a lot of music, and I would mark and measure and listen to them upright, and then put them. I tried them with the tweeters inside, with the tweeters outside. And what's interesting is I felt, and I did not, truth be told, I did not use any scientific measurement software, but my ears told me that in this situation, in this room, on top of this configuration, that they sounded better like this.
Mhm.
And I think part of it is because they are facing a little bit upwards, and I
Right.
think I'm getting less comb filtering from reflection off of the console.
Yeah.
I think that's probably 90% of the reason why they sound better in here, going this way,
Okay.
because slanted up maybe, I don't know, 15 degrees.
Right.
So to me, they just sound better in my room this way. So I would recommend people try them both ways.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea having speakers a little bit lower and pointing upwards so that you minimize the first reflections of the desk,
Yeah,
because most of us have a desk at least,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
Uh, mm, you have a console, which is an analog console still, and so how do you look
That's
at your
SSL.
yeah? How do you do it? What's your workflow nowadays in terms of hybrid analog? How do you do a lot of analog tweaking before while you're recording and then just mixing in the box, or is it
Yeah,
something else?
it's transitioned over the years. When I first opened this studio, um, I was mixing through the SSL. So I guess, more of a hybrid approach. And now with the workflow and the budgets and recalls and so forth,
Mm.
I am mixing totally in the box. But I'm using a lot of analog gear going in,
Mhm.
so that I'm obviously shaping the sound by picking microphones and preamps and compressors, and with some EQ, not a lot, on the way in. And I'm always thinking about how the mix is going to sound. It's like always be mixing. That's my motto. From when you're placing the microphone, the just before the first day of recording, the idea is to always be mixing, and if you're not, then you're going to be doing more fixing. So I'm always thinking about how the mixes are supposed to be at the end, and picking out gear to get me part of the way there, or as far as I can get.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, mixing in the box. So this SSL also is a really good controller. It's a
Mhm.
DAW controller, so I can control Pro Tools, I can control Nuendo, from the SSL matrix.
Okay, so that's how you use it. Do you use any summing on the SSL or just
No,
stereo out?
no, just I once it's in the box, it stays in the box, and I'm doing artificial summing with plugins.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Pretty
and
much the same on
there's
my
a
end
lot more
too.
options, and I think in the next few years you're going to see pretty much everybody doing that. Even the guys that have been mixing for years and years and
Mm,
years through consoles have switched over, and
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just quicker and you can tweak things over a few days or even weeks without being worried about the recall.
yep,
Mm. Um, this is very educational what you're saying, and so it begs a question about your educational activities, which are many, and you populate the internet as well with lots of good advice. Is this something you like in particular doing, education,
you know,
teaching?
I really love working with students one on one, particularly those who are passionate, like me, about their craft. It's really very, very rewarding, and the time just flies. It's like almost like being in a really good recording session when you have good players. The time just flies.
Mm,
And when I'm working with somebody who is really passionate about learning and improving their skills, um, it's it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy passing on all that I've learned in 30 plus years to somebody who's just maybe starting out, or
mhm,
maybe is sort of midway in their career and just wants to fine tune their skills. When I was teaching at UNCA, I taught their mid level and their advanced
mhm,
classes. So I got a lot of good experience there. And, some of the kids were really passionate, some of them weren't. And so now I focus mainly on people who really want to fine tune their skills and work with a mentor, rather than trying to
mhm.
watch 20 hours of YouTube videos and trying to figure out which person was actually right about the
Mm.
best way to record, drums or whatever, because there's so many contrasting opinions out there. And I think it's sometimes hard to sort through all of that, unless you're at a certain stage. But there's a lot of misinformation or, so information out there, and it can really help to have a trusted mentor to work with. So,
I think it's a really good approach because the education as we know has gone through. It's based basically on the Industrial Revolution, so it's basically numbers and churn them out as quickly and as massively as possible. So the one-on-one teaching model has kind of slipped away. While I think it's still the best one if you really want to, get in there and learn properly. So how do you do it? Do you do it in your studio or somewhere else?
well, up until when the pandemic got really bad, I was. And then I also worked virtually.
Okay.
I was using audio movers for a while,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
can work really well in conjunction with TeamViewer,
Hmm.
because you need some kind of visual to go along with it.
Yeah.
And now I think there's some tools that are integrated a little bit better.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Are there any few points that you think stick out with everybody when they learn sound, like common mistakes, common misconceptions about the whole process?
Yeah, and this is probably a pet peeve, also, I'll be honest. Um, I think that, people are way too concerned about, learning how to work their DAW,
Hmm.
and not concerned enough about the fundamentals of mic technique and recording technique and
Hmm.
gain staging, and you know and I think to their detriment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the DAW is there, to capture the sound and then manipulate it afterwards. But
Hmm.
the DAWs are. Oh, here's another thing: the DAWs are too powerful. Yeah,
Mm.
and I say that because I do a lot of mixing and mastering of people that have recorded their own projects, and there's a lot of damage that you can do with these powerful plugins
Mm.
in the DAWs. So if you don't have great mic technique going in, and then you overuse these powerful tools, when it comes time to mix and master, you're really trying to do a lot of repair work.
Mm. Mm.
So I think number one is to teach the fundamentals about good mic technique, gain staging, where to put the mic, what mic to select, and then more importantly, what not to do, what not to
Mm.
use in all of your plugins in your DAW if
Mm.
you're going to try and mix it yourself,
Mhm.
then send it to be mastered. So I think those things, the tools are dangerous, and learn about the basics. I still refocus myself on basics every time I do a session. I'm always going back to the basics, and they never fail me.
So it kind of sounds with great power comes great responsibility, kind of.
Yes, and if you don't know how to take on that responsibility, you can do more harm than good.
Mm.
We should
Yeah.
be like doctors, right? The first thing, do no harm,
Mm.
right?
That's
That's
true.
when we're making music. And a lot of my clients have come back after the fact, and they said, I realized that I love that one plugin, but yeah, boy, I
Mm.
overused it and created a big problem, and so.
But yeah, you mentioned mastering a few times. Do you do it yourself or do you send your mixes off to somebody?
I do a lot of, because I've been mastering for 30 years, I do a lot of my own masterings. And I do send some out as well. Usually, if I'm going to do my own mastering, I'll get away from it for a couple of weeks and just come back to it fresh, like it's a project that was sent to me.
Hmm.
But it is a good idea in general if you're going to mix something to send it to another set of ears who's going to listen
Mm.
to it in a different environment. I've been doing it for so long that I've kind of got my own system that works well, and so yeah.
Okay, so another question that I love asking in terms of mastering is, how do you feel about the loudness war?
Well, we thought the loudness wars were over, but they're not, and I don't know
Mm.
that they ever will be. People are still mastering at just insane levels because they feel like and now the sort of the latest one of the latest reasons is that they translate better when you're listening on those little iPhone speakers. And there's probably some truth to that. Um, so, and I've sort of adopted a in between, and unless I'm getting specific directions from a client, and I'm still mastering fairly loud, but I'm not mastering things at -8 LUFS, or and rarely go to -10. I'm more -12. Um,
Mm.
as my target, and and that's still hotter than what the streaming services are going to
Yeah,
normalize it to anyway. So and it's mostly about density. There are other ways to get density out of a
sure.
mix than just
Limiting.
make it limiting. Yeah, a lot of people don't talk about and aren't aware of upward compression. And
Mm.
there aren't a lot of plugins that do it, but there are
Mm.
several good ones that do upward compression. And that is much more musical than slamming it against a limiter,
Hmm.
bringing up the softer parts
Exactly.
without hitting a ceiling.
Yeah.
So I've been doing more upward compression in my mixes and masters these days, along with limiting, and to bring out a little more of the detail
Hmm.
without hitting it with a hammer.
Speaking of leveling and things like that, do you use a lot of manual, so to speak, automation on your tracks before you hit the compressors to kind of even out the playing field before even it goes into the dynamic processes?
Yeah, I will a lot of times make little edits and bring that chunk down, where there's a peak,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
or write in a little automation. If you can, it's always better. It's time consuming though.
Yeah, it is.
So you have to weigh out the pros and cons, and
Mm-hmm.
and if you do proper gain staging, and you're running into some track compression and then some bus compression and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit of limiting on the bus, you know usually just on drums, just to catch a few of the peaks. By the time you
Mm-hmm.
get to the end of the chain on the master bus, hopefully you've kind of controlled things, so that you're not slamming the ceiling at the on the master bus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is a question. What AD and DA converters do you use?
Yeah, so I have the RedNet, the studio's Dante. I set up for Dante,
Mm-hmm.
and so I have 32 channels of the second generation RedNet, made by Focusrite.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and mostly those are for the A to D side, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and they're really, really good. And then I have the mastering grade RME, for monitoring.
Okay.
So I'm monitoring out of the RME and basically going in on the RedNet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I actually use RedNet as well sometimes, and
Right.
I have a question from myself because I use Apollo and RedNet interchangeably depending on
Oh,
where I am. So my question would be, how do you deal with the monitoring for the musicians? Because I guess you're using the RedNet and the Dante system for the monitoring.
No, I am not.
Okay.
And I've been reading more about doing that, and
Mhm.
I may at some point switch over to that because I have Cat 6 everywhere in the studio, all the
Yeah.
booths
Mhm.
and several places in the main room. But right now, that Cat 6 is used for hearbacks.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm just using a traditional hearback system. So I'm going analog in into the hearback
Okay.
and distributing it that way over Cat
Yeah.
6.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like something I want to look into too. I'm using the Behringer mixers, and I use a mix of ADAT and analog depending on what sampling frequency I want to work at, because they are limited to 48 at ADAT
Yeah,
level. But there is Allen and Heath and some other solutions where you can actually go in Dante and then use their own protocol over the Ethernet. Yeah,
yeah. There's three or four now you can go
yeah,
directly in Dante.
Dante.
They're
Yeah,
quite expensive, you know,
they
like
are.
4 or
But
5,000 for just four musicians, you know, four little
exactly.
mixers.
Well,
Yeah.
I believe that the other it's the ordinate license for Dante that's making things more expensive, because obviously every every maker has actually incorporated that license cost, obviously, and the hardware, Dante hardware, into the final product. It's not always that easy to make things cheap.
That's right.
So another question: what are those big in-wall speakers that we've been talking about?
Those are Dyn Audios.
Hmm.
Yep. Um, yeah.
That's it. There you go. That's a short answer. Do we
Yeah.
have any other questions popping up, or shall we just continue our own? I think sounds like so nothing. Okay, let's just carry on then. How do you? There's one thing that I've been looking into is how the singer, and less so with the musicians, but the singer and myself on the piano as well. I've noticed that how we deal with the very slight latency that we do have on in any digital system. There is a little bit of it, and the phase latency. I mean, it's not the total opposition, obviously, most of the time, but there is some of it. And I've noticed that whenever we're singing into a mic or listening and recording on a piano, for example, that slight latency tends to do some com filtering between my own ears and whatever I'm hearing and what's coming back. I found it very difficult to deal with, and I've been messing with basically fluid phase plugins and things to kind of correct it, just for the singer and me playing.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people are much more sensitive than others. Drummers sometimes can be very sensitive to it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say flip the phase and see if it's better.
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes it's not a 180. It's could be 45,
yeah,
60. It depends
sure.
on the latency. And it can be a really small latency.
Yeah, and sometimes small latencies are the most irritating because it's
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Another thing I would recommend is to use extreme isolation headphones
Okay.
because what you're really hearing is the difference between the timing of the singer or the piano player um,
Mm,
hearing, so to speak, the sound in the room going through it to their ears and the difference of the sound arriving from their headphones. So it's
mhm.
that millisecond between those two
Exactly.
things that causes the comb filtering. Excuse me. So if you're isolating the musician
Mhm,
better with the headphones, if there's
mhm,
less bleed, um,
mhm.
so they're hearing less acoustically, then that's probably the only other thing you can
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, that actually brings up an interesting story that I've lived through. I've ordered myself a pair of in-ear monitors that been, molded to my ears,
Yes, perfect.
and there's a company called Lime Ears, and these guys, I went to see them, and they said, "Well, have a look at different models, and we have, like, every model has some different characteristics. I've listened to them all, and I've picked one, and they started laughing. And I said, "Why'd you laugh?" Well, with this one, we've basically modeled it on an APS speaker, which I found quite.
Oh, that's
Yes, they did.
amazing.
They did, and I was, I
I
said,
love
okay, well then, I'm an APS man through and through. So,
it. That's
so I'm
amazing.
using that. That's the
Well,
in-ear.
send me in the chat or an email because I'd like to find out.
Okay,
I have
yeah,
drummers that come in and use in-ear monitors.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Some other musicians, but mostly drummers, and that's another way of getting great isolation.
Hmm. Yeah. We have another question. Do you offer accommodation for artists and bands recording in your studio?
Um, I used to. The apartment is currently not available, but for many years I did. And yeah.
Is it easy enough to find accommodation nearby?
Oh,
If
absolutely,
okay.
absolutely, yeah. And there's lots of Airbnbs and hotels that are very inexpensive in Asheville, and it's a great place to hang out and make music. It's a wonderful, wonderful town. There's tons of live music here, lots and lots of great studio musicians that I work with all the time because I work with a lot of singer-songwriters.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it's fabulous. I just finished an EP with Andy Wax from Miami, a great singer songwriter, and we used all the best local studio musicians, and
Mhm.
he was thrilled with how it turned out.
That's actually something that I'm very interested in. I had a chat today with a friend of mine who's a session musician, and we were wondering on how the way they play together and how many years they've spent playing together impacts the way they play. Because obviously, session musicians are all great musicians level wise, they all play. But that glue that comes from being in the same band for years on end and sharing the same, concerts and rehearsal time, it makes for quite a different track. At least that's how I feel. How do you do that? Do you pick people who play together for albums?
Yeah, and some of these guys I've been using for so long that they wind up playing together, both in gigs and because they played together here so many times. They have a shorthand method of locking in and grooving with each other.
Mm,
It's actually, I find that it's actually tricky to find a band that where all the players are really on the same level of
yeah,
studio
musicianship.
musicians.
Mhm,
Yeah, a
mhm,
lot of times with bands, it's like the sum is greater than the parts.
mhm,
And but some of the parts, the players, when they get into a studio, they're really not that comfortable. The studio environment is not comfortable for pretty much anybody.
mm.
You're under the microscope. It's comfortable for me, but rarely, do I have artists come in and say, "Oh, I'm so comfortable being in the studio." Now, as studios go, this is a very comfortable studio. The
Exactly,
vibe,
that's right.
the vibe in here is just great, and I
Mm,
could tell you stories about that, but in general, being in the studio, musicians are much more comfortable being in
mhm,
front of an audience, and you
sure.
know, so it's challenging to get that vibe. So I've had a couple of instances where we've used bands to back players, and some of them have worked out great because it just so happens that all the guys in the band, they were really at that level that they get calls to do studio sessions
Mhm,
individually. And then I've done other sessions where the band was great live, but they get in the studio and they just, that same magic just didn't
didn't
happen.
work. Yeah.
So it's not black and white.
It's a balance. Another question which stems from what we've been talking about, what do you do to make musicians feel more comfortable in your studio? Aside from lava lamps, of course, and coffee.
Yeah, yeah, I don't use lava lamps. Uh, I think it's about the energy that you bring to a session. A lot
Okay.
of it. It's the energy you put into the walls, into the
Mm,
studio. It's the energy you bring to the session.
mm,
And if an artist knows that that you have their back, and that you've worked really, really hard to make the technology as invisible as possible,
Mhm.
and that you really want to make them sound like their best performance on their best day of their life. If
Mhm.
they know that that's your goal, hopefully you'll get there. Maybe not quite, but if they know that that's your goal and they trust you, that you're going to try and keep all the gear invisible as possible, then
Mhm.
that helps them relax. I mean, there's little things you can do. You have dimmers on the lights. You make sure the temperature is, the right temperature. You make sure that they have all their snacks, and that you make jokes, and there's lots of little things you can do to get people to relax. I always thank the musicians, before we hit record. I always thank them for being there,
Yeah.
and how happy I am to have them.
Nice.
So yeah, and then I've done a lot of work to just keep the vibe in the studio in welcoming and relaxing and inspiring. Having a beautiful studio can be really inspiring for some people. Although I've had some people over the years that were more comfortable in a dirty, messy studio.
Yeah.
They don't tend to book time in my place. But
I know
people,
what you mean. It's a very strange thing,
yes,
especially with some dirty rock and reggae and style kind of,
yeah, yeah,
the
and not
vibe.
not to get too weird, but Sound Temple, the name actually, there's something behind that.
Mm.
Um, one of my goals that I'm focused on all the time is to really make the world a better place with everything I do here, and so that's a very sacred goal for me.
Mhm.
I really believe that energy, translates from me and from this space, and there are a lot of people that they don't quite know how to explain it, but they just walk in here and they feel inspired, and they are trying to make the world a better place with their
Mhm.
music as well. So when those two things intersect, it's a perfect match, and then people feel very at home and comfortable and relaxed, and so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, well, I think I'm gonna look for some plane tickets to go and see you because, just you talking about it makes me wanna come and visit and
Uh, it's a
sample that
it's a
atmosphere,
great
so I'll
it's
be sure to come.
it's a great
Uh,
place. You're
uh,
welcome.
I will, thanks. Before people come in, musicians or bands, do you, have, like, a list of things you would like them to think about?
Thank you for asking. Um, I think this is sometimes overlooked. I know, and I'll go through this part quickly. I know in some studios, bands show up, and the first thing the engineer says is, "So what do you have?" And almost like they're starting from scratch. And sometimes maybe that approach can work. I talk a lot to the players, to the band, to the artists, about their goals, their vision, their music, their genre, their songs. I do a lot of prep, and when they walk in the door, everything is set up. Every mic is set up. Everything's labeled. Patch bass set up. The mixes are halfway done. The monitor mixes.
Mhm.
So I spent a lot of time in preparing before clients come in, and that is actually another thing to really make them feel
Oh, yeah,
comfortable when they know you've done the hard work the day
before.
before the recording session starts. It gives them a sense of they can relax. So I ask a lot of questions, and I'm already thinking about how things are supposed to sound in the mix.
Mhm.
Again, always be
Mhm.
mixing when I'm asking questions. So I'm trying to
Mhm.
formulate a mix in my head, a goal, when I'm first interviewing the client. So that's extremely important. Is the prep. especially if it's a bigger session.
Mm,
If it's a simple overdub or something like that, then it's not appropriate to get into a lot of questioning. But if it's a bigger project, I like to really lay down the groundwork.
great. Question. Hi, being a constant subscriber to Chris Shiflett's Walking the Floor podcast, I've heard that oftentimes there are these meetings of several singer-songwriters in Nashville. Something I wouldn't know anything about. What I mean is that they meet in the studio and create songs together. Do you have such meetings in Sound Temple? Okay, that's it.
With several songwriters, I would say no. Usually, a singer-songwriter will hire me, and then most of the time, they will let me pick out the studio musicians that would best
Mhm.
bring their music to the place that they would like to have it. But having lived and worked in Nashville, I know that that happens a lot.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's actually a something I try to promote over here in Poland is to have creators of all kinds and musicians that play different instruments get together and write things, and that's what we do here as well during workshops. So I think it's really good to have living people in the same living space creating, and you don't need to be in a studio for that, because the more you do in terms of songwriting and arrangements before, the less time you spend in the studio, right?
Yeah, you definitely don't need to be in the studio to write
Yeah.
songs. In fact,
Yeah.
often it's more comfortable to be in your living room
Yeah.
with another songwriter.
Yeah. Speaking of big sessions, I've noticed, and you've talked about that as well. You've got a big Yamaha Grand. You have a booth specifically designed for that Grand. Uh, do you sometimes record both the drums and the Grand in the main room, and why?
Um, I haven't. Let me think. No, I don't think I've done any sessions where I've needed to. When I need to record the grand in the big room, I always put the drums in the middle booth.
Hmm.
And they sound great in there. It's just tighter. It's they swap. So if the piano's
Okay.
in the big room, drums go in the middle room, and vice versa. The bleed is it's pretty intense. Although I've tented the piano with good results. I once recorded a jazz chamber group here. There was I think 13 musicians.
Oh my.
So for this place, that's a lot. And so we had piano in the middle of the big room, and we had 3 or 4 woodwinds on that side. We had 3 or 4 strings on the other side. I had trombone in this small booth here. I had vocalist in that small booth there. I had vibes in that medium-sized booth there. Drums were in the middle, and then I think bass in that booth. So so there was a lot of bleed in the big room, of course, and that was challenging. But tenting off the piano helped. And the composer, Michael Jeffrey Stevens, wonderful jazz composer, was in the middle directing everybody. And
Okay.
the
So
way all the windows work, everybody could see everybody, so he could actually play and direct. So that was
so
great.
he was playing on the piano.
He was playing and directing. Yeah, conducting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. So I guess would you approach that session so that you actually were thinking completely of what the instruments in the main area were sounding as in the mix, because you knew there was a lot of bleed, so that was obviously impacting the way you would have left, right, etc., because the mics from the piano would pick them up from both sides, right?
Yeah.
Or that wasn't a problem at
Well,
all.
the piano mics weren't really the problem. I think I was using ribbon mics, and the piano was tented fairly well, so we weren't getting too much bleed really at all. And the piano player plays loud.
Mhm.
So we really weren't getting much bleed into the piano mics from the other instruments. There was just bleed from them next to each other. But
Okay.
sometimes that can really work for you
Oh, yeah.
with
Yeah.
good players.
All right. Wonderful. Robert, we've just hit 1 hour.
Wow, that went quick.
That went quick, but given how interesting the talk was, I'm sure we'll meet again, and APS
I
will
would love
continue
that.
to keep in touch with you.
I would love
So I
that.
would like to thank you very much
Thank you.
for
It was a
being
pleasure.
our guest. And I would like to thank you guys and girls watching us and invite you to see the video afterwards. Obviously, all these videos stay online, and hopefully, we'll be doing an episode every month. So until then,
Awesome.
see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Bye now.